Now, just a little warning before we begin, there will be major spoilers in this video for the 10th episode of Andor, so if you haven't seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, it is a really, really good time to click away. Okay, so, wow, what an incredible episode. All the build-up and setup from the previous two episodes pays off in big, exciting ways here, and I don't just mean in terms of action, I mean all around. And this is, in my opinion, the best episode of the season so far, which is not something I say lightly, considering just how good each and every episode has been. And with just 2 episodes left this season, and thankfully Season 2 has been greenlit and will go into production later this month, I have little doubt we're in for a real treat in these final 2 episodes. I honestly cannot believe how fantastic this show has been all around. As I keep saying, this isn't just great for Star Wars or Disney Star Wars, this is greatness, period. That said, let's get straight into talking about this absolute masterpiece of an episode. It is virtually flawless. I would have to give it a 10 out of 10, which I do not normally like to give something 10s because that implies perfection. Anyway, starting at the beginning, we are picking up pretty much right where last week's episode left us off. We know that because we see a guard and the medtech from the last episode wheeling Ulef's body away. Well, he's not wheeling it away, it's hovering, but you get what I mean. And this shows us we are, of course, mere moments or minutes after what happened last week. We then see that Kino and Cassian have yet to be, shall we say, deposited back into their cell block, and they're having a rather intense conversation or sort of argument about what to do now. We have Cassian insisting they must go or make their escape attempt tomorrow when a new man is brought to replace Ulef, but Kino is still kind of processing all this. He's, of course, on board. We saw that at the end of the last episode with his simple yet rather chilling line, "Never more than 12. But he's not sure about throwing caution to the wind and trying tomorrow already. There also has to still be this part of him that can't believe that he, in the course of a day, essentially, he went from thinking he'll be going home in 200 days if he just keeps his head down and doing what he's supposed to do. There's even this really great blink and you'll miss it moment when, after getting back to the cell block a bit later, Kino stares at his number of days left, at 200 some days left. He stares at it for just a moment as if he can't believe he got that close to going home, but now it's kind of being snatched away from him. Again, it's this sort of blink and you'll miss it moment, which the show is actually full of, but it's this level of attention to detail that is so very impressive that takes this show to a whole other level. Anyway though, Kino went from a couple 100 days and he gets to go home to learning that no one ever gets to go home, that his only way to ever get out is to fight his way out, and that the odds are, of course, stacked against them. Not to mention he is simply afraid, as anybody would be in this situation. Though Cassian tries to insist that they are, the guards I mean, they are the ones who are afraid right now, that they just killed 100 men to keep their secret about no one ever going home safe. But Kino points out that he believes that isn't fear, it's power. But Cassian then counters by saying that power doesn't panic, and that he'd rather die trying to take them down than die giving them what they want. And these seem to be the words that finally kind of break through or ring true to Kino and kind of convince him what needs to be done right now. It's in this moment that he begins to realize that he is essentially dead already, or a dead man walking right now, that he is going to die in this prison, or maybe another one just like it someday down the road, unless he does something about it, that he literally has to fight for his life and his future, and that potentially dying that way, dying for yourself rather than for them after who knows how many years of service building these parts for them or whatever else it might be. He realizes Cassian's words are right, that's the better option, that he would rather die tomorrow in the hopes of freedom than live who knows how many more years as a slave, essentially. Cassian then, after a little scuffle between them, even mentions how important the parts they are making likely are, which, though he doesn't actually know what they are, it further leads me to believe they are, ironically enough, since he'll eventually play a part in blowing the thing up, that they are making the building blocks of the Death Star itself. All in all here, we're not only seeing the rapid evolution of Kino as reality bears down upon him and forces him into action, but also the slow and gradual evolution of Cassian as well. We're not going to be surprised to see him want to actively fight against the Empire once getting out of this hellhole. This all then gets capped off with the two returning to their cell block and everyone else asking what's going on, what happened to Ulef, and so on. And it's Cassian who begins to explain what is actually happening, while Kino, for another moment or two, he looks on the verge of kind of breaking down before he screams out that no one gets out of here alive. And more or less he tells everyone to start thinking about how they're going to get out of here, to get back in your cell and think of a way out of this place, because we have little time left. And this whole sequence was just brilliant, chilling and brilliantly shot and acted. Andy Serkis is again delivering a phenomenal performance, as is Diego Luna. Let's not take anything away from him or anyone else in this show or particular episode, which is just, again, good all around. But that said, Serkis is on another level in this episode. He has somehow already become a favorite character of mine, and we know next to nothing about him other than the backstory he came up with for himself, apparently, and talked about in a recent interview. Moving on, though, we then go back to ISB headquarters and get a brief scene that sort of updates us as to the status of their trap to catch Krieger, who is essentially the leader of one of the many rebel cells out there. And it seems the ship that they set adrift in space after getting information about an upcoming attack from the pilot, who turned really quickly, apparently. Anyway, this ship has been found and reported now, and it's Lonnie, who we haven't seen or heard much from until this episode. He suggests that the least suspicious thing that they, the Empire, could do is to take an interest. That it might look odd if the Empire doesn't find it curious that a ship with a dead pilot has been just found floating in space. And what I enjoyed about this brief scene was once again the attention to detail. When Lonnie makes his suggestion, the camera actually goes to Dedra, who we can see thinking about and almost processing this suggestion to see if it does indeed make logical or good sense, which she clearly thinks it does since she doesn't question it and just goes to essentially carry out the order. We then go back to the prison where we see Cassian just before the lights come back on and his counter ticks down another day. That his eyes are open and he likely hasn't got a moment of sleep the entire night, that he's been going over everything over and over again. And he's probably not the only one, I'd wager, who had a sleepless night. Kino then gives a little speech about how they're done, that there was only then and now going forward, and that the rest of them can play it however they want in their own mind, but he's going to assume that he is already dead, which I kind of talked about before, but basically means it'll be a bonus if he somehow escapes and gets out of this with his life. They then learn while on the bridge and switching shifts that they must remain on program and are no longer allowed to talk to each other at this point during the transfer. Clearly they no longer want any form of communication between the shifts or the floors or anything. They want them all as isolated as possible. We then very briefly go to Ferrix, the only time we do in the episode, where we see that both Cinta and the Empire are keeping a very close watch on Cassian's mother, and we also sort of overhear as a doctor shows up that her breathing is getting even weaker. It seems both Cassian and his mother are simultaneously fighting for their lives, though in very different ways, and it'll be interesting to see what happens when Cassian, I think, inevitably goes back to Ferrix to see his mother. After that, it's back to Coruscant, this time to the Mothma residence, where we see or meet Davo, who we heard about last week, that Tay, the banker Mon is working with to move funds around for the rebellion. He suggested that he could help Mon Mothma with her recent activities being noticed or potentially noticed by the Empire, even though he himself, Davo, is a rather shady character that she'd rather have no dealings with at all, but clearly realizes she has few other options, if any. And do forgive me if what I'm about to say is, well, what I say about virtually every character in the series, but Davo is interesting right out of the gate. Loved his line about how one of the indulgences of wealth is freedom from other people's opinions, how money means you don't really have to care so much about what other people think about you or what you do with your life. It's a great and yet sort of subtle way to tell you the kind of person he is or his mentality. And by Mon's response, we can further tell just what she thinks of him, that she doesn't like him, and she isn't afraid to let him know that. Though what I liked about Davo is that he tries very hard to make Mon feel comfortable about what she is potentially going to do, knowing that she's not the type of person that would want to do something underhanded or get her hands dirty, you could say, with illegal-ish activity. Which, yeah, might be a little odd considering what she has been doing behind the Empire's back, but she of course wants to keep up appearances whenever and wherever she can. Davo even tries to convince her that it's her money and that she should be allowed to move it about as she sees fit and with her privacy intact, that the Empire has no right knowing what she does with her fortune. Mon then insists that this is a charitable foundation that they're forming, which Davo likely knows isn't really the case, but he plays it off as if he doesn't care one way or another. Business is business to him. Mon then asks what it'll cost, and Davo says there will be no fee, sort of throwing the charitable thing right back in her face. She then insists, obviously not wanting to owe this guy any sort of favor, that she pay him in some way, shape, or form kind of up front, which is then when he says he simply wants an invitation back at some point in the future, and that he has a 14-year-old son he'd like to bring with him. Mon, of course, immediately understands the implications here, that he wants his son and her daughter to have an arranged, though unarranged, wedding, because Davos claims that's not his intent, though if it naturally happens that these two kind of fall for each other, then let it be. And as we know, or have sort of deduced along the way, Mon's own arranged marriage to Perrin has not been the most blissful thing that has ever happened, quite clearly, and she doesn't want the same thing to happen to her daughter. She even comments here about how it's not exactly a tradition she is in favor of, not to mention she just flat out doesn't want to associate her family with this guy. Mon then basically kicks him out and says she's not even considering it, which Davos says is the first untrue thing she has said. And we know he's right, of course. We know she's at the very least, considering it and maybe coming to terms with the fact that the fight against the Empire that she has found herself in, it may cost her more than she ever kind of imagined it would. I mean, Mon is quite clearly very, very smart, but I don't think she has really grasped the fact that she could lose her family in all of this, or maybe I should say that she could lose her daughter, because I don't think she really cares so much about losing Perrin, if you will. But here it smacks her right in the face, finally, that she is appalled by the thought of kind of betrothing her daughter to the daughter of Davos, yet at the same time, she is considering it. She is considering sort of sacrificing her daughter for the cause. This is then followed up by another very brief scene that takes place at Luthen's shop, where Clea essentially informs him that signals have been left indicating someone, who we'll soon learn turns out to be Lonnie from the ISB, that someone wants a face-to-face meeting with Luthen. Clea believes the timing is rather suspicious and that it could be a trap, but Luthen figures if it's a trap, they're pretty screwed one way or another, so he's going to go himself. Back to the prison we then go, where we see the fears of the prisoners and kind of the hopes and anxiety of the prisoners as well. We have one tell Cassian that he's dead over and over and over again, and Cassian only tells him not to die until he puts up a fight, basically saying if you figure you're going to die, then you may as well be some use to us who want to get away, who don't quite consider ourselves dead just yet. We then see Cassian head to the bathroom, or refresher in universe, and he takes some type of tool with him to break the pipe we've seen him working on before. When he passes Kino, we hear Kino say, "One way out," which is sort of, or will become, their rallying or battle cry during this escape. Kino then simply goes back to bossing everyone else around, trying to keep their cover, which again, it's just the little details like this that make the show so good in my opinion. We then see the new guy about to be brought in, and he's shaking and looks absolutely terrified, which is kind of funny in a sad sort of way, because he has no idea that the first moments of him being in this place are going to be the start of a major prison break. He thinks he's in it for the long haul, but is quickly going to learn or have to join the fight to escape or die. He's just trying to come to terms with all of this, what's happening to him, kind of like we see Cassian going through in those first couple episodes, or the first episode I should say, and now he'll be thrown into this prison escape. Anyway, as he's being brought in, we see Cassian trying to break the water pipe in the bathroom, the idea here being to short out the floor when they inevitably activate it to quell the eventual uprising coming. And after the guards take one last look in, we see all the prisoners in the room trying to arm themselves with whatever they can find at this point. And I don't think there's much of a reason for me to sort of go through the whole escape sequence moment by moment. Instead, I just recommend watching it again because it was tense in the best possible way. I mean, if you felt like the show was lacking action, and sure, an argument can be made, I guess, you certainly got your fill of it here. But more so than that, than just action for the sake of action, it had plenty of meaning, emotion, and stakes behind it. Everything in the previous couple episodes with the prison is ultimately and beautifully paid off here. And to kind of skip ahead, the speech that Kino gives to the whole prison, telling them who he is and what's going on, and that this is their only chance to get out, it's quite honestly one of the most powerful things I've ever seen. Just the emotion in his voice, the way he doubts himself at first, until Cassian encourages him, telling him, this is something you do every day, and now we need you to do it for the sake of everyone in this place, to the way the music begins to swell and the chants of one way out that come from it. Just everything about this speaks to the heart of Star Wars. It's the message of hope when all else is darkness. It's so beautifully done here, and I just love that they add, or he adds, that you need to help each other to the prisoners, telling them to care for each other. This guy who at first we kind of thought, or I kind of thought, only cared about himself and was more or less working with the guards and the Empire by default, it turns out he cares so much about everyone else around him. The Empire could not destroy the man he truly was. That is a very powerful message. And perhaps the worst part of the episode, if not the entire series, happens at the kind of end of all this. That, as Cassian even says to Melchi when they reach the water, or the cliff to the water, or the edge to the water, that whatever happens now, we made it. But it turns out that Kino can't swim, and just the way he says it, the little ironic smile on his face and almost this laugh in his voice, it breaks your heart. Here he is, free. He's fought for his life and the life of everyone else in that station or the prison. But something as stupid as never learning to swim is going to stop him. And after Cassian kind of gets pushed in accidentally, we'll now never have any way of knowing what becomes of Kino after this, unless he somehow shows up somewhere else at some point, either in this series or maybe in another series or whatever else it might be. Which I really hope he does. I really hope we get more from this character played by Andy Serkis, but it would be cruelly fitting, I think, for his story to end just like this. Remember, Star Wars always has this element of bittersweetness, and there's nothing I can think of more bittersweet than his character helping everybody to escape, though I don't think many of them make it afterwards. Nothing more bittersweet than helping so many to escape, only to be stopped by an inability to swim, of all things. Either way, we then get a top-down shot of this prison, and it looks an awful lot like an Imperial symbol, a massive, oppressive representation of the Empire, and you see all these little specks swimming away from it and to freedom. Back to Coruscant, we then go down into the lower levels of it, which was so very cool to see in live action, where Lonnie wants a face-to-face meeting with Luthen, as we kind of learned before, and he wants to warn him about both Dedra and that she's after him, or after someone she currently calls Axis, and that the attack being planned by Kreegyr is known about and an ambush by the Empire is waiting for him. Lonnie then, after Luthen brings up his daughter, then talks about how she is the reason he basically wants to get out, which, as is all too often the case with the show, and I love that it ties into what Mon Mothma is going through right now. She's almost being asked to, again, sacrifice her daughter in a way in the name of the rebellion. Yet here's Lonnie, who sort of is drawing the line at this very thing, that he won't risk his child for anything else. But Luthen, being Luthen, tells him that he can't let him go, that he's too valuable and too much has been invested in him. He's so valuable, in fact, that he's going to let Kreegyr's men, some 50 of them, die in order to keep his cover intact. And he's not going to warn him about an attack because then the ISB will know they have a leak somewhere in their ranks. Well, Lonnie then, feeling like he's being asked to do and give up too much, then asks what exactly is Luthen giving up, probably expecting a sort of non-answer, though I must say the one Luthen gives is a rather epic and chilling response that shows us, or explains to us, the dark side of the rebellion in a way we've never really had it explained before, and we don't usually get too much of a glimpse of. Because he basically tells Lonnie that what he is giving up is being a good, decent person, that in some ways he has become something worse than the Empire in order to defeat them, and that he'll never get any sort of credit for all this, that the ego that set him down this path in the first place, where he had to defeat them, it can never be satisfied because it'll never get the recognition it wanted in the first place. It is one of the most fascinating speeches ever given in Star Wars anywhere at any time about anything, and it goes along with something I talk quite a bit about on this channel, which is how exactly do you defeat someone or something that is true evil, like the Empire is or the Sith are behind it? How can you defeat that which will do anything to achieve victory or hold on to power, that which has no moral or ethical code to limit what they will do in pursuit of what it seeks? What are you supposed to do when virtue becomes a crutch or hindrance that allows evil to endure? And the answer is given by Luthen in his speech, or what he believes the answer is, that you essentially have to become something worse in the name of bringing about something better. You have to sacrifice everything to stop that which will do the same. And at the end of the day, when you hopefully achieve this victory, you will not or cannot be recognized for your actions because they were just as deplorable as what you put an end to. And somehow you have to be okay with that on a personal level as well. But anyway, not to get too deep into that discussion, the episode ends with the only two people we absolutely knew would make it, that being Melchi and Cassian. It ends with them making it, and us left to wonder if anyone else has made it. We see that there are search crafts looking out over the water for escapees, but so far no one is in pursuit of them that we know of. And again, one way or another, we do know that they will both somehow get off planet and end up being in Rogue One. Alright, so in closing here, wow, what an amazing episode. I feel like I only scratched the surface with these review caps, as I call them, but I don't know that anyone would want to listen to me ramble about them for an hour or so, but they're that good. There's that much going on. Every single scene has a purpose to be discerned and explored, and it keeps you on the edge of your seat, not just because of the general tension in the show, but because every character interaction is a sort of conflict, not only with each other, but within themselves. I see many say the show is lacking in action, but what they fail to realize, or maybe find uninteresting, I don't know, is that the real battle taking place is not with lightsabers or blasters or starships. It's the moral and ethical battles being fought within the self. The struggles with selfish wants versus selfless acts to help others, or to fight for something bigger than yourself. This show deals with what the real Star Wars, the Star Wars that lies beyond the surface level spectacle, is truly all about. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this episode and what you expect to see in these final 2 episodes of the season. And so leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.